Welcome, New South Wales.
Welcome, Victoria.
Welcome, Western Australia.
Welcome, Northern Territory.
Welcome to South Australia.
Welcome, ACT.
Welcome, Queensland.
Welcome, Tasmania.
Welcome, Australia, to International Holocaust Remembrance Day and the annual commemoration of the liberation of Auschwitz. Our first ever national event, bringing together Holocaust museums from across the country. In 2005, the United Nations established International Holocaust Remembrance Day to commemorate the tragedy of the Holocaust. Tonight, you will hear from a diverse group of people who have chosen to be a light in the darkness.
I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and waters across the country and wherever you may be. Today, I am on the traditional lands of the Kulin people, in particular, Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung, and I welcome you to this land. I pay my respects to the spirit ancestors, elders past and present and emerging.
How does one mourn for 6 million people who died? How many candles does one light? How many prayers does one recite?
We tell these stories because perhaps we know that not to listen, not to want to know, would lead you to indifference, and indifference is never an answer.
Whoever hates, hates everybody. Whoever kills more than his victims.
We didn't even talk. Some of us tried. No one wanted to hear. But we did not become bitter. We believed naturally that one must bear witness.
It wasn't easy. We knew silence is forbidden, talk impossible. But things are different today. Young people listen. They want to know.
They will visit our museum, listen to survivors, because they want to learn from our past to prevent it from becoming their future.
This fiery memory remains, and we, you and I, you and all of us, now are its very privileged custodians.
My name is Guta Goldstein and I was born in Lodz, Poland. Today I'm lighting this candle on behalf of all survivors in Melbourne and Victoria to honour all their loved ones who were murdered in the Holocaust. I now pass on this candle to my granddaughter Tali to ensure that this light will shine in their memory.
I will ensure that this light is passed to all future generations, so we shall never forget.
We are blessed here in Australia, blessed with peace and freedom. We are an accepting people who have become the most successful multicultural nation on earth. And part of that blessing are the thousands of Holocaust survivors who have made their home here amongst us as Australians. They are a blessing beyond measure, though their numbers now may dwindle. Their testimony lives as a light to all generations, as a light to our nation, with memory and testimony passed from one generation to the next. On this International Holocaust Remembrance Day, we honour their courage and their wisdom. And in the quiet, we close our eyes, we open our ears, and we hear the voices of times past, the lives, the loves, the joys, compassion, and the unlimited potential that was violently snatched from our world. We owe it to them, and we owe it to our children to remember. It is beholden on us to share and to repeat the testimony of those who survived to every generation. Holocaust survivor Michael Reisner's post-war journey brought him to Melbourne. In 1948, he published his story of survival in Yiddish, the language of his ancestors. Of the 50,000 Jewish people in his hometown of Białystok in Poland, only a few hundred survived the concentration camps. He gave his account so that we would never forget. In time, his story became part of a tide which became a flood of memory and testimony that has flowed ever since. More recently, Eddie Jaku, survivor of Auschwitz, gave us the gift of his memoir, The Happiest Man on Earth, a truly great book, which I read last year. In that book, Eddie says, hate is a disease which may destroy your enemy, but will also destroy you in the process. The Holocaust scholar, Dr. Jan Laniček, who has spoken to survivors across Australia, says on days like this, we must go beyond remembering. He says we must ask ourselves, what have we learned from the past? And what must we do to prevent it happening again? So, on this day, we reflect on those questions as we repeat our vow, never again.
I was born in Czechoslovakia, a beautiful place I once called home. Back then, it was one of the only true democracies in Central Europe until the Second World War broke out in 1939. On his quest to take over the world, Hitler began by expanding Germany and annexing the Czech part of the Republic to the Great German Reich. He needed Lebensraum, space. Slovakia was transformed into a self-governing puppet republic headed by a Catholic priest who was installed as its president. He was a staunch anti-Semite and almost immediately exercised the Nazi cruel Nuremberg laws. He began to persecute what was the loyal Jewish citizens. I still find it inconceivable how it was possible for the world to keep silent as innocent people were collected, tortured, killed, and burned. I'm a Holocaust survivor. I'm a witness. I was in Auschwitz as an inmate, not a tourist. My entire family was killed there. Auschwitz was not conceived in heaven made by God. It was carefully planned by people for people. It was a place carefully designed by so-called cultured people. Their aim was to destroy us, the Jewish people. Sadly, the Jewish people was betrayed by mankind. Humanity was not concerned. The world kept silent. The disappearance of so many people could not have gone unnoticed. No one asked, where have my neighbors disappeared? Killing Jews reached a point when it meant nothing. It became an entertainment value. National Socialism was the idealism by the most evil political theories. Auschwitz was the bottom of hell. It was the center of evil that had no tomorrow, where the sun stopped shining and the birds stopped singing. It was easier to die than to live. Survivors live with an ongoing trauma. To learn to live with what has happened is impossible. Humanity could never fully understand the world of a survivor. One could never comprehend what happened behind the barbed wire fences. Horror camps are now sanitized museums. There are no voices to be heard. To describe the most hideous events in human history cannot be exaggerated. I was face to face with Dr. Joseph Mengele, the angel of death, on 2 occasions. I was on the threshold of death. Nothing can match the experience I have endured. Souls are wounded, scars can never heal. What is the general outlook on the Shoah? What is the general outlook on life after liberation? The Holocaust was the tragedy of our Jewish people and our families past. We are concerned that it should never happen again and it should not be denied. Survivors telling their stories are not fairy tales. They are stories which have no happy endings. Australian Jewish Holocaust Museums are a great way to protect the Jewish culture and history. Holocaust education provides the foundation to equip generations with the power to challenge deniers with facts. We have to make sure that the factual events of the Holocaust remain in the national consciousness. Hearts were broken, just like when glass hits the floor and shatters to pieces. After 6 long, ugly years of the war, I have emerged from darkness like out of a long, dark tunnel to the end of light. During the time in hiding, my mother's future was read from her palm by a stranger. He said, "Madam, you have 2 children, but one is somewhere in chains." My sister was already in Auschwitz in 1942. "Your other child is safe and will survive the war. She will cross the ocean and land in a place where there's a lot of sunshine." Yes, I have arrived in Australia. There is a lot of sunshine. It's a wonderful place. The survivors are now the last link with the millions who were murdered. We survivors are the graduates of Holocaust. We endeavor to teach in order to develop spiritual and moral strengths. We promote dialogue to establish mutual understanding and respect so people of different cultures could live in harmony. Those following us may not think we have done so in vain. Holocaust education must be preserved. Holocaust history is based on facts. Please listen to a Holocaust survivor who has the strength to tell a vital story. The survivors have a mission and obligation to speak out. We cannot let testimonies fade into oblivion. That subject can never be fatigued. It is a unique historical phenomenon. The memory of witnesses is more exact than the history written by those who were not there. Auschwitz was liberated on the 27th of January 1945, the date we commemorate today, but for many liberation came too late. Sadly, I lost my mother on the day of liberation in Bergen-Belsen. I was devastated. Should we stop talking about the past? Is it possible to follow advice, to live in the future and not in the past? My answer, I do not live in the past. The past lives in me. After the long, ugly, dark years, I emerged from the darkness just like out of a long, dark tunnel. There was light at the end of the tunnel, and I have arrived there. I often wonder why I have survived when so many died. But I finally reached the light after years in the darkness. Our memories and thoughts are here to share. We are strong, and we conquered the evil impulses. Being alive, I find this to be a personal triumph. I shall never forget the past. It would be an insult to the victims. We should always remember and say never again. Today we remember the good people as well, referred to as righteous Gentiles. They provided shelter and hope under danger, extreme danger. We also pay tribute to the Allied forces, the brave men who lost their lives fighting for peace. Please let us commemorate, and please let us never forget.
My name is Felix Goldschmidt, and I was born in Brno, Czechoslovakia. Today I light this candle on behalf of all survivors in Tasmania, to honour all their loved ones who were murdered in the Holocaust. I now pass this candle to my grandson Lockie to ensure that the light will continue to shine in their memory.
I'll ensure that this light is passed to all future generations, so we shall never forget.
When I was a young law student, my professor of jurisprudence, Julius Stone, taught me many things, but he would always return to Pirkei Avot, the sayings of the fathers. And one of them I'll never forget. It is not given to us as human beings to solve all the injustices of our world, but neither are we released from the obligation to try. And that is why, as we reflect upon the Holocaust and the special terror and wickedness of it, we have to try to ensure that those who were guilty are brought to justice and that we avoid the repetition. For the United Nations, I've had the privilege to work in a number of pretty awful circumstances in countries that do not respect universal human rights. In Cambodia, after the Khmer Rouge, in North Korea, in more recent times. The wrongs are great, and securing a response from humanity is urgent. But it's difficult, and it's easy to do nothing. But we must find a way as human beings to respond, and to respond with power and effectiveness, so that we never forget the Holocaust, and we never forget human rights violations wherever they occur. It is not given to us as human beings to solve all the wrongs of the world, but neither are we released from the obligation to try.
My grandmother, Saba Feniger, was a survivor.
In 1997, she gave video testimony to the USC Shoah Foundation, a project of Steven Spielberg. In the second part of her testimony, she is accompanied by her family, including me. Her history was always in her present. It wasn't just that the memory of the Shoah never left her. It was more. It was deeply woven into the surface of her consciousness. In the testimony, she didn't just triumphantly describe her family, she described us as a triumph. Sat there, surrounded by her offspring, -1 who was still on the way, I felt like she was comfortable but grieving. She was satisfied but defiant, as if she was not just looking at a camera from America, but leering into the depths of hell and challenging those who were doomed to toil there for eternity to come and get her, knowing full well that they couldn't, but if they did, it mattered not, because with us by her side, she was invincible. In her life, I often felt as if the armour of her victory was impossibly strong, but stretched, like a thin veneer. It covered up her constant sense of loss, but it didn't imprison it. It was ever present, but easily restrained. Her story of survival was never far from any conversation she was in. It did not haunt her, but it never left her. This duality defined her all the way to the end. The final question the softly spoken interviewer asked her was what should come forth from the testimonies the project was gathering.
This video, what should come out, what should come forth from this project, from all these testimonies?
Well, my dearest hope is that nothing like it should ever happen again, and that racism will eventually subside, that people will realize that we are all the same. Whether it'll happen in this century or whether it'll take more years, I don't know. But I really want to hope that prejudices and racism will not prevail.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A stranger would have expected, been satisfied with, and perhaps a little moved by this response. However, a grandson who works at a Jewish organisation with this principle embedded at its core was suitably shocked. The theme for this event is a light in the darkness. For my grandmother, I was and am that light. But as I listened to her words again, I think she chose them carefully. She stated that her dearest hope is that racism will eventually subside and that prejudice will not prevail. Her dearest hope. It did not feel like she was describing her own active effort. Rather, it was a powerless plea, an urge. I felt like she was, in 1997, actually passing on the torch to me to try and finish this job. She states unequivocally that we were her triumph, but perhaps in creating us, she also expended her greatest effort. What I mean is that me and my family are not a representation of her effort to overcome injustice. The effort is atomically and fundamentally us. Of course, my grandmother worked and spoke widely to thousands and perhaps tens of thousands of people about these lessons and her hopes. Indeed, she was the curator of the Holocaust Museum in Melbourne for 17 years. But as I reflect on her words, her life, and my own life, I realise that she was not going to do the hard work and the struggle that is required to defeat racism. She'd done her bit. Of course she had. Clarity dawned on me. It was my job now. One of my favourite quotes is from William Lloyd Garrison, an abolitionist and journalist. In the first issue of his abolitionist rag, The Liberator, he wrote, "On this subject, I do not wish to think or speak or write with moderation. No, no. Tell a man whose house is on fire to give a moderate alarm. Tell him to moderately rescue his wife from the hands of the ravisher. Tell the mother to gradually extricate her babe from the fire in which it has fallen. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will not retreat a single inch, and I will be heard. The apathy of the people is enough to make every statue leap from its pedestal and to hasten the resurrection of the dead." When I think about the work that Stand Up does and the work that I want to do, I think about this quote. Rabbi Joshua Heschel, when addressing a civil rights conference in the 60s with Dr. Martin Luther King, also quoted Garrison. He added that when a black person in America is offended, he was as well. When a black person was bereaved, so too was Rabbi Heschel. Whether or not we achieve radical action, systemic change, or absolute victory, it must still be our goal. Our goal must be as lofty as it is personal. Rabbi Heschel is telling me our connectedness means that true justice and equality means more than sweeping change. It means the minutiae of relational change is our task as well. At Stand Up, we are a small organisation with lofty goals. Our programs, both new and old, will not alone achieve our vision of an Australia free from systems and attitudes that entrench disadvantage. We know that. We know that partnering Jewish people with refugees will change people's lives, but it won't eliminate racism for good. We know that our partnership with Aboriginal communities in Toomela and Boggabilla changes lives. We know how deep the bonds of our friendship are, and we know how much good has come out of that friendship. But we also know that this unique bond won't achieve reconciliation between the wider Australian community and First Nations peoples across Australia. At Stand Up, we take solace in the fact that we are part of a growing movement that will, inevitably, emerge victorious. The theme today asks me to consider different forms of darkness, like injustice. I have considered these, and they are not complicated or hard to see. They are hard to solve. Performing acts of kindness is not how we will flood this darkness with light. It's how we will see ourselves in the darkness. I think my grandmother was asking me to be more than a light in the darkness. She was asking me to build a sun. At Stand Up, we've committed to work with marginalised people to tackle big problems through action and education. One day, I hope that I will be able to sit back with my children and grandchildren, staring comfortably into the camera without the duality of my grandmother, with the knowledge that her triumph bred my own. That my work, along with the work of millions and billions of people, has led to the correction of injustice and solutions to the wicked problems that plague our planet and our people today. Then we'll all be at peace.
My name is Jack Meister. I was born in Katowice, Poland. Today I light this candle behalf of all survivors Sydney, New South Wales, to honour all their loved ones who were murdered in the Holocaust. Now I pass this candle to my grandson David and shows that light will continue to shine in their memory.
I will ensure that this light is passed to all future generations, so we shall never forget.
Today, we remember and honor the victims and survivors of the Holocaust and those who resisted the Nazis, as well as the victims of the genocide of the Roma. As individuals, we have a responsibility to keep their legacy alive, to reflect upon the history of the Holocaust and its enduring effects. We live in a world that still faces genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. Let us answer the call to be a light in the darkness and strive for a world that remembers the Holocaust and for a world without genocide.
I'm grateful for being invited to participate in the International Holocaust Remembrance Day virtual event. Thank you to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance for making sure we mark this day, even at a time when it's hard to come together in person. And thank you for all the work you do to promote awareness of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. I again reaffirm Australian Labor's support for your definition of anti-Semitism. Hateful slurs are contrary to our values and have no place in respectful debate or the airing of disagreements. The theme for your event is one I think about a lot, what it means to live in a world where darker forces are never far from the surface, and what we all need to do to elevate humanity's better instincts. And just as for many of you and your families, this hasn't been merely a philosophical question in my life. Prejudice and hatred can take us to dangerous places. They lessen people's value. They dehumanise. They marginalise others as inferior and undeserving of the protections and dignity afforded to all. History is replete with examples of the crimes that are perpetrated against humanity when prejudice succeeds, none more horrifying than the Holocaust. Remembrance of the atrocities of the Holocaust is necessary to ensure they are never repeated. And we need to work to prevent prejudice and hatred taking root. That means we also need to remember how the dehumanising extremes of authoritarianism came to be normalised. Over recent years, we have seen rising authoritarianism and nationalism in many countries. We need to always guard against hostility towards different backgrounds and worldviews, promotion of simple lies over complex truths, and privileging dominant identities over others. As our public discourse becomes more fractured and fragmented, as digital media echo chambers replace the public square, we need to work harder to find common understanding and shared purpose. It is true that intolerance exists at both extremes of the political spectrum, but right-wing extremism has ridden the global wave of authoritarianism. Right here in Australia, 30 to 40% of ASIO's counter-terrorism work is focused on counteracting violent right-wing extremism. All of us who care about living in a peaceful, respectful community must lift our voices and call out any normalisation of hatred and prejudice. And we need to make it clear to political leaders that that is what we expect from them. If we each shine our own light, darkness can never prevail.
My name is Ruth Lando, and I was born in Berlin. Today I light this candle on behalf of all the survivors in the ACT to honour all their loved ones who were murdered in the Holocaust. I now pass this candle on to the next generation to ensure that the light will continue to shine in their memory.
I will ensure that this light is passed to all future generations, so we shall never forget.
The world is facing numerous challenges, and we see with our own eyes how easily human rights in a society can be eroded or completely abolished. But we owe it to our future generations to hear the stories of hope, of courage, of standing up for the rights of others. They must know that we all have a role to play to protect human rights and uphold the core values of society. Through Holocaust education, we can ensure that young people become the force for good in this world. On this International Holocaust Remembrance Day, we should all stop and remember the victims, the innocent men, women and children who were taken away and were murdered simply because of their race. Let us all, together, dispel the darkness, shine a light of hope, and help further strengthen Australia as a welcoming, humanitarian, and inclusive society. We owe it to all those who were murdered in the Holocaust to ensure their stories continue to shine brightly, encouraging us to create a better world.
The Holocaust was not just a crime against the Jewish people, but a crime against humanity. 6 million Jews were murdered by the Nazi killing machine, including 1.5 million innocent children. The atrocities of the Holocaust were some of the darkest times in world history. When US General Dwight Eisenhower liberated the concentration camps and saw the sites of the death and the destruction by Nazi forces, he said there would come a time when the people of the world would not believe what had occurred and would deny that the Holocaust ever happened. We need to work together to better educate people about the lessons of history, in particular this tragic time. We have a duty, a mission, to ensure that we do everything we can so the world unites and says, never again. We must continue to honour the memories of those who were killed. But we must also do all we can to educate younger generations about the horrors of the Holocaust, for if we don't learn the tragedies of the past, they are doomed to be repeated. I, like so many others, lost family members in the Holocaust. Every day, my surviving aunt, Mary Frydenberg, lived with that sad history, with her number etched on her arm from a time in Auschwitz. My wife's grandmother survived, but her grandmother lost both parents and 9 siblings. My wife's grandfather lost his mother and 8 siblings. I've often told people of my visit to Auschwitz and my personal reflection, and how I didn't feel any anger. I just felt empty. Empty with disbelief that the so-called cultured people who produced Bach and Mozart and Weber could descend to such inhumanity themselves. It is still hard to believe that this has happened. There is no defence for what took place. And it is why the federal government is investing in the establishment of the Adelaide Holocaust Museum and the Steiner Education Centre in South Australia, and also providing support for the establishment of a Holocaust Museum and Education Centre in Queensland, in both cases partnering with the local state governments. Every Australian, young or old, should know what happened. Holocaust education should be in the curriculum with a national network of Holocaust centres so that the children of today and tomorrow learn from the past and work towards a brighter, more tolerant and inclusive future. Elie Wiesel, the Nobel Prize winner and survivor, said, "Anyone who has listened to a witness is a witness." And as we all learn about the Holocaust, we too become a witness. We must believe in action, not indifference. We must believe in educating the future generations with literature, testimonies, museums, and school courses. We all have the collective duty to ensure never again.
My name is Rivka Maiteles. I was born in Halmeu, Romania. Today, I light this candle on behalf of all survivors in Perth and Western Australia to honour all their loved ones who were murdered in the Holocaust. I now pass this candle on to my granddaughter Jessica to ensure that the light will continue to shine in their memory.
I will ensure that this light is passed on to all future generations, so we shall never forget.
My name is Bert Klug, and I was born in Sered, Czechoslovakia. Today I light this candle on behalf of all survivors in Brisbane and Queensland to honour their loved ones who were murdered in the Holocaust. I now pass this candle to my grandson Paul to ensure that the light will continue to shine in their memory.
I will ensure that this light is passed to all future generations, so we shall never forget.
My name is Andrew Steiner. I was born in Budapest, Hungary, and I light this candle honouring the survivors here, Adelaide and South Australia, and all other victims of the Shoah. And I handle this light over to my daughter, Hannah Webster, and her son, Jude.
I will ensure that this light is passed to all future generations, so we never forget.
שאנחנו בניהם ובנותיהם, אחים ויחוסיהם, נוברים צדוקו ביד הסקורס נשמו עשיהם.
we pass this light to you.